40% of people who have been diagnosed with a substance use disorder, like drug and alcohol addiction, roughly 40% of them are also sex addicts.
It's Rusty Diamond, motherfucker. Yo, man. Well, Miss Rusty, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Public Access Podcast, the podcast here on the Rusty Diamond Podcast Network. It's October 10th, 2024. It is episode 592. And this guest was episode 570, which was 6 months ago, but there was a 3-month hiatus. So guess who's back? Back again. It's my special guest. Tell a friend. It is Bailey Heuser. And the show starts.
And
I
it
don't know.
begins.
And it begins, and I don't know where to go on this because it's weird because I have my intro that I'll say something, but now I got to this part and then I don't know because it just sort of goes into conversation. So I've been kind of toying with how to
Yeah.
figure out that part. Might
I
not be the
think
best
sometimes
idea.
I imagine that listeners, people don't realize how much of a talent it is and how much practice it takes to do like cold interviews and to make them sound fun and warm and friendly and flowy. It takes a lot of work to get there.
Right. How'd you do it?
I still haven't. We do like interviews on my podcast, the True Crime Podcast, and we bring in sometimes like super smart professionals and they're just like burr, burr, burr. And you like we interviewed a couple of FBI profilers who are retired and they're very
Oh,
serious people. They're very serious people. And you try to like joke with them and they're just kind of like, what does that even mean? And you're like, oh, never mind, just kidding, ha. Ha. So we've gotten real good at just being like, okay, well, thank you so much.
are those podcasts usually ending shorter? Like, are they shorter
No,
in
they're like
time,
an
or
hour.
do they all go an hour and then you stop it, or do you have some that go like 2, 3 hours and some that go seven
No, it's
minutes?
we usually just stop it at an hour regardless. Like we have some really cool ones where like we interviewed a friend of mine from college. She's a 911 operator. So we wanted to hear about like life as a 911 operator. And we could have done that for hours, right? Talk to her about it. But a lot of times these people are just generous with their time and we don't want to, ask too much for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, an hour is kind of a good time. And I mean, like, you think about how much, whatever they're making an hour, whatever they can make an
Right.
hour, like they're taking it. I mean, we're not paying them. Probably. I don't know if you're paying people to be
Mm-mm,
on your show, but
mm-mm.
um, I don't know. Yeah, it's odd. Um, I had someone, I posted a thing on there trying to find some new on Facebook, trying to get some new guests, and someone asked if my show, if I'm charging people to be on, or if I am, if it's some sales thing, basically to set up a sales call. Because I guess that's probably a big thing that goes on with podcasts. But
I guess so. I just thought it was kind of the culture that the expectation is that guest, like being a guest is free on podcasting, but that just means that I'm not, rolling in the big leagues with like Joe Rogan and Dax Shepard and all of them, right? Maybe on
right,
that upper level, that's what they do, but not
you think,
on the bottom dwellers where I'm at.
yeah, I mean that's where I'm at too. And so I mean, are they paying people? Are people paying them to be on their show, do you think? I
Well, I think Joe Rogan pays like he flies people to his studio to record. He sets them up in a hotel, like he pays for all of that. But I don't know if he
Wow.
actually pays them to be on his show. I think people would pay Joe Rogan to be on a show because he has such a reach.
Yeah, I mean, I think people even do that for being on the news sometimes. I don't
Yeah.
know, like I feel it's pretty tough to get on the news. At least for me, it's been pretty hard. Like, I don't know what you do to get a spot on the news, or if you have to pay, or what. It seems I don't know. What do you think of that? Have you tried trying to get on the news for anything, or have
No,
you
you
been on the
actually
news?
just blew my mind. I was like, you've tried to get on the news, Rusty? That's never even crossed my mind to try to be on the news.
Yeah. And I don't know, like why not? Why not be on
Yeah,
the new
true.
the news? And then it's something that will be on the internet then. And 'cause I don't know who is would be watching the
I don't
news
know.
at that time. Not I don't know who watches the news, or if it's just, everyone's on
Yeah,
some
I don't
sort of
know.
social media and sees, ooh, okay, that's what happened. It's the truth.
Right. I don't know, man. It's a whole area to be explored.
Yeah. Um, I mean, yeah, I don't know, like if I would try to, I don't know if being on the news is even worthwhile now, or what, or like one of those, I don't know, like a cable news channel, one of those whatever
Maybe
things, like,
like a like a live radio show,
yeah,
maybe would have a better reach because people are already tuned in like audibly. So maybe that's their preference. I don't know.
I don't either. And so just kind of left it, I guess. Maybe try now, try again, but who knows? Who knows with all that stuff? But yeah. So okay, so we had you on. We I had you on last time, and we were talking, and yeah. So we're going to get into sex addiction and more of what you do and what you work with, and we ran out of time because I wasn't going to take. I don't know. I don't think it was more than an hour that we talked last
Yeah.
time, and I'd assume not. It wasn't that long ago, but it was long enough ago where, like, we're on 592, but I also took off 3 months, and so I think it's been 6 months. I think that was
That
probably
sounds about
the
right.
the
Hmm.
thing, because yeah, that's about when I'll have someone on again. And yeah, so then yeah, we left off there, and so trying to think. So you probably like, is it ever something that comes up on your podcast? Is that ever something that, like, this crime could be related to this, or I have insight into this crime because of this?
Yeah. Yeah. Like not a whole lot, but it does come up. And, being a therapist and having a true crime podcast is people would be like, oh, that must mesh really well. And it does. But I also have to be really careful ethically because I can't say things like, oh,
HIPAA.
this dude for sure was a sex addict, because that's not really ethical for me to do as a practicing therapist. Like I didn't have him as my client. I didn't give him the assessments. I didn't see the assessments. Like I didn't do a biopsychosocial with him. So I can't definitively say that. Right. But I can say things like, some of the main indicators of sex addiction are A, B, and C. And as evidenced by his behavior throughout this case, it's A, B, and C. Maybe there's something there to be explored. Not really sure. You know what I mean?
Yeah, gotta kind of take it back a little bit, pump
Yeah.
the brakes. And so what did you I mean, yeah, no, because it's probably a different kind of lens to have, and I don't know how many people are in that crossover that you'd be in, or is that something that comes up, or does it come up? You ever like work anything where you show up for a court or anything of that sort, like where you get
No, I
subpoenaed?
haven't. Luckily, in my career, I haven't been subpoenaed for anything legal. I've knock on wood, I've dodged a bullet for that. So I haven't had to do any of that kind of stuff. But yeah, there's definitely some, you said something about crossover and just kind of like an interesting fact or perspective to put it in perspective for people roughly.
You will sleep better than you have ever slept. You've never been this relaxed. Are you ready to change your life? I'm Rusty Diamond, certified hypnotist. You don't need to leave your house. You can stay in your bed. You can stay in your favorite chair. You just need a computer or your phone. You can get a hold of me. Stay at home. I'll make your life better.
Hypnosisisgreat.com.
40% of people who have been diagnosed with a substance use disorder, like drug and alcohol addiction, roughly 40% of them are also sex addicts. And so
And
it's a huge Venn diagram crossover. And, I worked residential treatment for years and years. And, after I got trained up in sex addiction, I was able to catch things that I never even knew I should be looking for, right? As far as sex addiction is concerned. And
such
I would
as,
say it's
oh,
just
sorry.
behaviors like, just certain kind of telltale indicators of acting out behaviors that I wouldn't have really thought twice about, or it wouldn't have made me kind of perk my ears and say, like, that's probably a little bit more like this, and ask more questions. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, like paying for sex work or, you know, cheating on partners kind of in a chronic way, even though they're dedicated to their partner and they want to be monogamous. And before I'd be like, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, that happens. It's no big deal. But it gave me a much clearer lens to understand, like, oh, you are not telling me everything. Just from experience, you're not telling me everything. And then they'll be able to tell me, like, yeah, you're right, I'm not.
Yeah. And then, so then where do you go from there? Like, what would be a natural progression when you start sort of sniffing that out?
I usually just kind of I have found from working with addiction so much that you can't bullshit a bullshitter. And I much love to anybody who's listening who struggles with drugs and alcohol or any form of addiction. I love you and I support you and I'm here for you. But y'all all know that when you're in active addiction, we're not super honest with things, right? We lie, we cheat, we steal when we're in active addiction. I mean, our brain's hijacked. And I have found that you can't bullshit a bullshitter. And so they respond best whenever I just am straightforward with them and I say, this is what I'm thinking is going on. You can tell me if I'm on the right track or if I'm not on the right track. And I find that educating them on like the kind of components of sex addiction, usually just starting with education, really starts that process and that rapport and that path of, walking down that path of discovering that.
What's that look like? What's kind of the education that you're bringing about? Is it more generalized, or is it more focused on each individual client?
So a little bit of both, right? But it's a lot of just general statistics. Like there's some research out there, and a lot of the research comes from Dr. Patrick Carnes. He's kind of like the leading figure in the sex addiction arena. But roughly, you know, 72% of individuals who struggle with sex addiction have 72% of them have a history of physical abuse. 81% of them have a history of sexual abuse. 87% of them have a history of like somebody else in their family having an addiction. And then 97% have a history of emotional abuse. And so sometimes, even just if I hear about sexual abuse in their history, right? And then, like, one of my favorite questions is, what was your first exposure to anything sexual, right? Like, what did that look like? What were the emotions tied into it? Like, so that's one of the first questions that I'll ask.
So you're just kind of diving right in when that happens. I mean, and that gives you a pretty great view of what what to expect, because there's probably a good amount tied to that event and that emotion. Is there ever a time where you find out that wasn't the thing if there are suppressed feelings or suppressed events that happen.
Sorry, what do you
Like,
mean?
so if let's say somebody had some, like if there was some sexual abuse when they were 4, and then but the first thing that they think of is like when they were 11, they saw you know, you know, Johnny's porno stash out in the woods or something.
Mhm.
Um, but they don't know about this event that happened when they were 4. Is that ever something that comes up, or does that make more
Yeah,
sense?
yeah. I mean, so I think yes, that does come up, but if they don't remember it, then I wouldn't know about it, right? Unless like the times that that has happened is usually like recovered memories when I do EMDR with them, like they'll have kind of some of that from the trauma work that we do, and then it helps kind of marry those two pictures and we say, oh, that makes a lot more sense. um but I honestly don't focus so much on all of that stuff. I think the most important thing when it comes to sex addiction, because at its root, at its core, it's an intimacy disorder. So one of the biggest misconceptions is that people think that sex addiction is like, oh, I just love sex and I want to have it all the time. No, that's not even what it is. It can be that, but it can be a lot of different things. And so at its core, it's an intimacy disorder. They struggle with filling that cup of closeness, right? And they confuse intensity for intimacy, right? That's one of the biggest indicators too, is like everything is fireworks and explosions, or they get bored really easily and they just like keep going through people, right? Like that's an indication that there's an intimacy disorder there probably.
So then, what would be the difference between intimacy and intensity? Because I also remember like one thing was, yeah, with the fireworks and all that stuff, like that's usually an indicator of something you should be kind of watching out for, something that could like, oh, when someone meets someone like, oh, it was fucking fireworks, like, oh, okay, well, watch out for that fucking person.
Yeah.
Probably not a good thing that's going on. Like, it's not what we were taught through movies and stuff. Like, oh, yeah, when we met, it was fucking fireworks. I had this thing in my stomach, like this fucking butterflies in my stomach. And it's like, no, that's not good. That's not a good thing. Most likely it could be, but more than likely it's not. It's your fucking subconscious telling you, hey, no, no, something is off about this. I don't know, is that something you kind of experience or
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to like downplay people's experiences or that kind of thing, but yeah, like a lot of times when I have these individuals who have a history of this, and or this is kind of in their story, everything is either it's intense and it's wonderful and it's magical and we're soulmates and we're burning souls that match each other kind of stuff, or I'm bored. There's usually not any in between, and that's one of the indications. Like, if I work with somebody and I do a relationship timeline with them, well, what happened in this relationship, what happened in this one, what happened in this one? Oh, she was awesome, she was this, she was that. And then I don't know, I just one day I just got she just was boring. I got bored. When you build a genuine authentic connection with somebody, right? Intimacy, into me you see, right? Like when you try to build that, then it's harder to just get bored and ditch somebody, right? Like you have other things that tie you in there other than just excitement and passion,
right?
right?
And yeah. And so then, I mean, what kind of okay, let me rephrase this. So like if someone's coming into you, um, is it usually like what is the reason then someone's coming into you? Is it usually their choice or is it someone else's choice?
For my sex addicts that I work with,
Right.
90% of the time it's an ultimatum because their partner found out that they have been unfaithful.
And okay, and then
Uh,
so the follow up to that. So then how often is that successful, not for them progressing and learning about it and evolving themselves, but going back into that relationship? Or like, is it because I mean, how if it's not about them wanting to do it themselves, as somebody else is like smoking or whatever other thing, someone doesn't want you to smoke but you still want to smoke, you're going to smoke. Is that something that you find there, or is it kind of different with
you
sex
know,
addiction? Or
I would say that most of the individuals that I work with, it might start as an external motivator, like they don't want to lose all of their assets, excuse me, through divorce, right? Like they've got an established life with their partner. And that might be kind of the real motivation behind coming. But after we start to like, they realize like how insidious this problem is and how much it affects them and how really miserable they are behind the dopamine rush, right? Usually the external motivation will become internal motivation, I've found.
okay. And then so what's kind of is it what kind oh go ahead.
No, go.
Oh, okay. So what kind of becomes the plan then after that? What's the um if they're going back to that relationship, or do you tell people to go back to that relationship, or is it individualized, or is it do you ever tell someone to leave that relationship and work on yourself, or how's that go, or
So
suggest?
I don't work with couples, and with the sex addiction kind of area, it's best that one therapist does not work with a betrayed partner and the addict, right? It's better. The recommendation is that, so like if I have a gentleman who comes in to see me and he says, hey, like this is what's going on with me, I've cheated on my wife, but she doesn't know, right? Or she does know, whatever the case is, it's fresh, everything's blown up. There's a very specific protocol that we follow in the CSAT community, the certified sex addiction therapist community, and that involves um, obviously having a certified sex addiction therapist in the process because we're trained on this whole thing. But there's a whole disclosure process, and it sometimes can take up to a year in some cases, depending on what the acting out behavior was. So you have all sorts of behaviors. You have like, you can have cheating behaviors that's not cheating. So it could be um, going to camming websites, strip clubs, massage parlors, and not actually engaging in sex. There can be like chronic objectification with your sex of choice, or cyber chatting, or like there are lots of things that people can do that's not violating the physical boundary, right? The sexual boundary, but that's still betrayal for the partner, right? So it depends on the behavior. If there are lots of other partners involved, or if it's just chatting with other women, it depends on the level of risk to the partner, the level of risk to the client, how much the partner knows, how much the partner doesn't know, how much are we going to have to prepare for your partner to find out that you have a secret family, right, somewhere else, because this isn't going to be something that you just tell her because you feel bad and you vomit the information and she has no support to process this bomb that she just dropped.
How does that work?
So the disclosure process includes, like, if I'm working with the addict, it's going to be me and the addict along with the betrayed partner and their therapist in the room. They're going to be facing each other. The therapists were off to the side, right? Like we were facilitating the meeting, but essentially the addict is going to give what's called a full disclosure. And this is after months of prep. This is after months and months and months of going back and forth, signing releases for, each partner's therapist, the therapist talking and coming together and figuring out, is the betrayed partner ready to hear all of this information? If I'm working with the betrayed, or excuse me, if I'm working with the addict, I don't get the full disclosure until 24 hours before. And the reason for that is because I'm sorry, I said that all wrong. My bad. If I'm working with a betrayed partner, I don't get the addict's um, full disclosure until 20 hours, 24 hours before, because I don't want to the my client, the betrayed partner, to feel like I'm keeping secrets from her as well, right?
Right. So are you working mainly with the betrayed partner or the addict? And
Either or both.
what's the, I know that there is uh like a I don't know. So like are the majority of one or the other more male, female, or in between, or like is it kind of 50-50, or what do
I
you
would
kind of
say
see?
the average, right, is more male being the addicts seeking treatment, and heterosexual males with female partners for being the betrayed partners. But there are all different types of relationships and dynamics of that.
So why do you think that is?
Well, to be fair, where I did this in private practice, I was in the Bible Belt. So
Okay.
I think there are lots of like circumstances that play into uh, you know, what I saw from my anecdotal perspective.
Right. Um, so then do you think that, I don't know, like if it's more, if you're going, like I don't know, I don't, is there a reason you think that women aren't uh the addicts as much, or is it not more unreported, or is it um or do you think that there's a difference, or do you think that it's just kind of, again, kind of circumstantial?
So that's a really hard question to answer. I think there's a lot of things that go into that. I think for one, women who might have sexual behavioral issues or addictions maybe is a little bit more glorified than it is with men, right? Like it's more exotic or erotic or arousing. I also feel like, and I don't want to sound any type of way when I say this, but I think just women have a tendency possibly to be more objectified than men are, right? In general, in our culture, at least in Western society, in our culture. And I think that that has something to do with it because a lot of the men that I work with, a lot of it is messages around sexuality and dating and sex and all of that stuff. So I also think it has to do with the shame component because most of the addicts that I've worked with, if not every single one of them, has underpinnings of shame that's kind of fused with the sexual acting out, right? So neurons that fire together wire together. And a lot of times it's some sort of shameful event that happened kind of in tandem with the sexual piece. So maybe that was mom walked in on them masturbating and then made a really big deal and talked about how disgusting that is and how, if they come from a super religious conservative family, how you're going to go to hell if you masturbate or have premarital sex. And so there's a lot of shame underneath it. And that tends to kind of act as an accelerant when it comes to sexual dysfunction and sexual behaviors like that.
And okay, so that's interesting. Um, so what was it like when you moved from the Bible Belt to where you're living now, as far as working with clients? What's something different that you notice between those clients?
There's
generalized?
the, yeah, so there's a lot more image management where I'm at in general. Um,
Meaning,
well, I don't know how to answer this because I don't want everybody to know like where I work and what I do specifically right now.
okay,
But I work with a population that just has a lot of image management. Like you have to act and present yourself to the general public a certain way. And then a lot of times behind the scenes, there's a lot more dysfunction, right? So here I still see the same issues. I mean, like the issues are the same no matter if you're in the Bible Belt or not, but who actually reaches out for help and how will usually differ. You know what I mean?
yeah. And I mean, yeah. So it seems like most of the people that you're ending up seeing are people that are already in trouble with somebody else, in a way. I mean, what's a way to get somebody before they're in trouble, or is it you just gotta wait until you get in trouble
As far as like in trouble, as far as like in
with
an
somebody
addiction.
and yeah, an addiction with some relationship of sorts that, you know, sends you to you. That
So I'll kind of go through like the bullet list of, for lack of better words, the criteria, right? And so
okay,
these are going to be like the check boxes. So the first one is chronic, long term, and it's been going on a long time, obsessive sexual thoughts and fantasies. It's normal to have sexual thoughts and fantasies. And the way that I describe that is like, I love vintage cars. I had a 79 Corvette a long time ago. And anytime that I'd see a Corvette, I'd be like, oh, wow, I really like that Corvette. That's a beautiful car. That's normal. But for me to stop what I'm doing, no matter where I'm at, even if it gets in the way of me going to work or whatever, and I look and I'm looking in the windows and I'm rubbing the hood of the Corvette and making it a whole thing, that's where it becomes a little excessive, right? Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Compulsive relationships with multiple partners, including strangers. So I think the key word there is compulsive. So you just keep doing it, even if you're setting boundaries with yourself, saying that you shouldn't, right? Like you just keep finding yourself in a relationship, after relationship after relationship, or multiple people at a time, even though that goes against like your morals and values. One of the big things that I look for is dishonesty around the sexual behaviors. So if you lie to cover up the behaviors, anything sexual, then there's probably something there, because if there's not a lot of shame there, then there's no need to lie about it, right?
right. Like what would be an example of that?
Um, like if I say like, hey, do you watch pornography? And someone says, I mean, sometimes, but maybe like once a week. And then I keep working with them and they somehow accidentally tell me that it's actually every day for 2 hours. That's automatically an indication that there's something there, because why even lie about that to begin with, right?
Right,
Um, Preoccupation with having sex or anything sexual, the sexual behavior when it interferes with daily life, your productivity, work performance, that kind of thing. So that's the big key. Is it getting in the way of you being a functional adult, right?
right,
Um, just like any addiction, inability to stop or control the behavior. So if you're like, I'm not going to watch porn and masturbate anymore because I don't want to, and you can't stop, then you might have kind of a porn addiction. Or, okay, I'm not going to cheat on my partner anymore. This is the last time. And you do it again and again. Like that's an indication that that's a problem. Um, Putting yourself or others in danger because of your sexual behavior, right? Like if you're violating people's consent for your own sexual gratification, then that's an indication that there's a problem. Um, if you feel any sort of like remorse or guilt after sex or sexual behaviors, that's an indication that there's something there. Um, And then if you have any other sort of like negative personal professional consequences from it, that's usually an indication that there's something there to explore.
So would that be the time to get a hold of you? Or,
Yeah.
if ideally, you
Yeah,
know,
ideally, like if this is starting, I had a, I had a client one time who was such a, he was in so deep with his porn addiction that he was watching pornography while he was at work. And some people might be like, yeah, it's not really a big deal. But when you're accessing your work computer to access pornography after you're not supposed to, and that's in the understanding that you're not supposed to watch porn at work and you do it anyways, that's a problem. That's getting in the way of your life. You know what I mean? You can't wait. If you can't wait to watch porn when you get home, right? How is that different from an alcoholic? Like if you can't make it through an 8-hour shift and you have to have, a shot of vodka on your lunch break, chances are there's something there to explore. I'm not diagnosing you as an alcoholic or a sex addict, but there's something there that needs to be addressed.
right. And then, so what happens you know, with people that are, I don't know. I mean, do you ever get someone that's comes in and you don't diagnose them, or does kind of everyone that comes in get diagnosed as a sex addict? Or, I mean, is there ever
Yeah.
like, oh no, you're not really, or
So that's the kind of tricky part, right? So sex addiction in and of itself is not in the DSM. All right. So
oh,
you have sex addiction is really kind of like a catch-all phrase for like compulsive sexual disorder, right? That's kind of what we're talking about, compulsive sexual behavior. And so I don't usually go straight to the diagnosing. I'm not one of those therapists. I want to make sure that you don't have something like, I don't want to make it harder for you in your life. So I'm not a slapping a diagnosis on people type of therapist. I don't do that unless they really need it for reimbursement for insurance. But I also didn't deal with insurance. I was self-pay, right? So I didn't have to submit diagnoses to insurance companies. Ethically, I just had to, keep record of the treatment interventions that I was doing and the treatment plan and that kind of thing, but I didn't necessarily have to have a diagnosis. So usually whenever I work with somebody, it's an understood kind of lay term when we refer to my client as a sex addict, or they self-refer to themselves as a sex addict. It's like that, right? It's just like substance abuse. Even if I diagnose somebody with severe alcohol use disorder, the term being an alcoholic is more of a social construct than it is like a formal DSM label. You get what I mean?
yeah,
So like you go to an AA meeting, they refer to themselves as alcoholics. You go to an SAA meeting, a Sex Addicts Anonymous group, they refer to themselves as a sex addict or a porn addict or something like that. So that's why the diagnosing part is a point of contention in the professional world when it comes to sex addiction.
okay,
People are also afraid, like people who are not educated about sex addiction, especially in the legal realm, they're afraid that if they make it a formal like diagnosis, that's going to be a scapegoat tactic in legal proceedings for those types of behaviors. Does that make sense?
like for a divorce or
Yeah,
other
or
stuff
like
down the road.
if somebody, was getting arrested for a sexual assault, their attorneys being like, well, they have a sex addiction and they, like they need treatment rather than going to prison for rape or something like that.
Right.
So
So is that, go ahead.
that's where I think the biggest point of contention is. Um, but there's a, and I think that's an important note, is there's a difference between sexual offending behaviors and sexual addictive behaviors. And there's only about 10% of the population that overlap. So it's a very small percentage. And so, like, we're working as a community, we're working to educate the public on that, but there's still a lot of pushback in that area.
By whom?
Especially like legal entities, like judges, attorneys, like the legal system is still really hesitant about um, formalizing that diagnosis for that reason. And there's
Well,
also people out there who say that sex addiction doesn't exist, and that's okay if they want to believe that. I That's okay. That's like saying schizophrenia doesn't exist. You're allowed to believe that if you want to. But I think all you need to do is have a conversation with one or two people who struggle with it, and it's a very real thing.
yeah. And okay. And so then is it worth it? I mean, do you think it's a good thing to have a formal diagnosis if it does end up with, into some sort of legal proceedings? Or do you think that it's better not to?
I mean, I think right now, without the support in a lot of those arenas, I don't think a label, a diagnosis is necessary. I think as long as the individual who is struggling with it and the therapist understand that there is a way to get out of the pain, that there's a way that you can heal and recover from this, and that the partners know that there's a community of support, I think that's the most important thing, whether you want to have a label on it or not. Because I mean, at the end of the day, we just want everybody to be happy and healthy, right? If you want to have sex 15 times a day with your partner, listen, go at it, go for it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a kink allied therapist, so I don't care what kind of weird kinky shit you do, as long as it's not causing distress or harm to other people, right? And
Right.
arguably to yourself.
And so what happens as a follow-up? Is there a follow-up, or is there uh forgiveness of some sort, or is it always, is there ways to get past it without it being always a point of contention, throughout afterwards?
Like with partners.
Right. Yeah, like
Yeah.
if
So,
the partner that they cheated on, or whatever it may have been, like, let's say
yeah.
a year down the road after treatment's done, or at a spot where it can be, less frequently had, um, what's kind of the outcome of that?
So, treatment for sex addiction is usually a 2 to 5 year process to be kind of in recovery for that, because most of the time, this has been chronic, long term, significant behavior for a long time, right? Just like
Right.
alcoholism, or something of that nature. So I have seen people heal and recover, and they both kind of have their therapeutic process. They go through the disclosure. The addict really puts forth the effort, makes changes, does what he or she needs to do, and so does the partner. And I've seen couples have an even better relationship post betrayal trauma. Um, but it takes a lot of work and it is not easy. And, betrayed partners, when they find out about from kind of ground zero, when they find out and they make the discovery, right? And it happens, it is a rough ride for everybody involved for the next 6 months to a year. It's rough.
Right. And then, yeah, how does the betrayed heal from it? Because, like, hopefully if they're moving on to another relationship, hopefully it's done before that next relationship. So it's not somebody is carrying that and having all that shit on them,
Right.
and bringing it into a relationship for somebody who is, just happens to be there, in a relationship with someone who hasn't worked through it. And, I guess for the addict or the betrayed, I mean, how important is it to work on it before they get in a new relationship? Or if you have one of those clients that says they're in a new relationship, what do you tell them before they've gone through all the work?
Yeah. So it's imperative. I mean, it's like that old saying, like if you don't heal what cut you, then you'll end up bleeding on other people, right? And so
Right.
if it's a let's say I have a couple, I'm trying to think of how to say this. Let's say I work with a gentleman who is the addict. He and his partner decide that they don't want to stay together after the discovery, right? Like after they found out. And he starts dating a new person. One of my recommendations, and whether they follow it or not is up to them, but one of my recommendations is they um, do a full disclosure with their new girlfriend or boyfriend. Like you need to let them know what your struggles are. They need to know what they're walking into. And then the same thing with my betrayed partner. If you start dating somebody new, you know, is this a pattern for you to find yourself with somebody who has an intimacy disorder issue? Right?
Right.
Is this a long history for you to date the same type of person? So a lot of times it's patterns, right? And not all the time, but most of the time it is. And it's just having more awareness around that and hopefully making better decisions around that.
Yeah. And so if people want to make better decisions, they want to work with you, how are they going to find you in the World
So
Wide Web?
I am not doing private practice right now, but I am always happy to point you in the right direction. I will send you, Rusty, a list of resources to put in like the show notes if you can,
Cool. Sure.
and they have links. Like I'll give you the golden grail, or the holy grail of, I was trying to say like the golden egg and the holy grail all together, and it came out
Well,
as one, which is fine.
that's going to be a fucking cool thing, the Golden Grail.
The golden grail, I like it.
Yeah.
But so that way, like I have links that you can include and they can tick it, they can click and they can do a quick test. Am I a sex addict? Right on Dr. Patrick Carnes's website. Um, I, you can do like, what is my level for betrayal trauma? Because kind of a fun fact, individuals who experience betrayal trauma, 97% of them have identical symptoms to full blown PTSD. So it is,
Makes sense.
yeah, it's a whole thing. And so, but if you want to reach out to me personally, just hit me up on my podcast website or my email. You can email us at wildside, and that's with a C, WILDCIDE podcast@gmail.com. And then feel free to ask me questions. Please don't make any reports of abuse or I have to follow through with it. Just send me a list of questions and I'll send you resources. Or if I know somebody in the state who's a CSAT where you live, I can provide you with their contact information. I will absolutely try to kind of be that link in the chain to get you to the next place that you need to get to.
Cool. Well, yeah. Thank you for being on today. I'm glad we got to
Yeah.
have this conversation and get some good information out to new people who
Yeah,
maybe
for
weren't
sure.
as aware, and I got to learn. So, it's all good. I get to do this for my own learning. So it's always good. I like learning new things. So thank you very much for
You're
that.
welcome.
And
I love educating people about it because I feel like it's so misunderstood, and people have such a bad stigma for it, but I honestly, the coolest people I've known are people in recovery, whether it's sex addiction, drug and alcohol addiction. They're honestly the greatest human beings in this world. So even if you
they got to
feel like you're not the greatest person right now, that doesn't mean that you're not capable of being an awesome human whenever you find
people
recovery.
people like to keep it real, and those
Yeah,
people got to keep it real. You got to keep it fucking real.
that's right.
So yeah, so cool. Well, thank you very much, and I hope
You're
you have
welcome.
a great rest of your day because it's whatever the fuck day it is. I don't know. It's today.
I don't know either, honestly. I think it's a
Yeah,
Thursday, but maybe it's not.
sure. We'll go with Thursday. Probably is. But yeah, I hope it's great, and we'll talk soon. All right. Send me
Thanks, Rusty.
you bet. Send me a message with the links, and then
Yeah, I will.
uh, cool. And yeah, we'll talk soon.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. All right. That's Bailey Heuser. So check her out. You can get a hold of her. You can check out her podcast, which is also on there, The Wild Side podcast, WILDCIDE. So thank you everybody for being here on the Rusty Diamond Podcast Network here on uh Thursday, October 10th, 2024, episode number 592. And that is the show, man. Boom!
It's Rusty Diamond, motherfucker. It's Rusty Diamond, motherfucker.